Hey everyone! Welcome back to the Fishbowl Podcast. I'm Sydney.
And I am not Brooke.
That's right. This is my dad, Pastor Gary Baldus, who is joining us for this very special episode where we are talking about what it looks like to work in ministry together. Let's dive in. Before we get started, you might be wondering, where is Brooke?
Yeah, where's Brooke?
Where is she?
Yeah.
Well, she is actually out of town right now, out of the country, out of the continent. She is very busy on a 5-week trip in Italy, and we miss her a lot, right, Dad?
We miss her. I bet she's listening, probably.
I bet she's listening. Brooke, if you're listening,
we love you.
Like and subscribe. We love you, we miss you, and we want you to come back to us over in Florida. Well, this is very special for me because I have been working at my dad's church, I would say since the beginning. I feel like I've been employed since the beginning with some child labor stuff, but I haven't been paid until I graduated college-ish. I worked a little bit part-time, and now I'm full-time. Dad, why don't you tell us a little bit about our church, New Walk Church?
Yeah, our church is in East Pasco, Florida, which is in a town called Zephyr Hills, but we call it East Pasco because we reach people from all over half of our county, which is a lot of population. We started 18 years ago and been growing since the very first day. Was a smaller community, and we were a good size then, but now with being one of the fastest growing communities in America, we're certainly growing even more, including in attendance, including salvations, coming to know Jesus, but also staff as well.
Yes, and I get the pleasure of being one of those staff. Oh, and one thing we didn't mention is my dad is a little bit of a podcast celebrity. Before there was ever the Fishbowl Podcast, there was the Better Man Podcast.
The Better Man Podcast, which still exists. I think it's on Podbean, but also
on Apple Podcasts, YouTube.
Apple Podcasts, YouTube Podcasts, Google Play, and all over Facebook archives too.
I will link it in the show notes.
Yes.
Well, let's go ahead and get started with our topic for today. The reason why my dad is here is because we do get to work together, and we wanted to talk both through the unique opportunities that you get to work with your parent, not even in general, but also just at a church setting in ministry. And that presents some really amazing opportunities, but also there are some different challenges that can happen. And my dad since he is a pastor, he has different perspective from me as an employee. So, Dad, did you ever envision when you started a church that your child would be working for you? Did you ever think about that?
Never really thought about it. I mean, I came out of a family business, my parents, and I did work for them, so it would have made probably sense, but at the time when y'all were so itty-bitty when we started, we were just worried about would this thing even survive, and so working hard for years just to become a healthy, vibrant church, that was really our main focus. I think as you guys got older, we hoped that you would probably work at the church. Maybe, I don't know, every dad wants his girls to be close regardless probably of what work he's in. So he probably wanted that, but I think it became a little bit more of a hope as you guys got closer to graduating high school. One thing, though, that you've touched on that was absolutely our focus, you've touched on another podcast just a little bit, is we wanted you just like church. So working on the staff was like, that'd be like gravy, I guess, but we just weren't sure how, our main focus was to make sure that you actually like church. So if you moved to some other place, that you would actually go to church, love the church, not just go to church, but love the church. And that is a challenge as a pastor with kids. That is a huge challenge. Again, you've talked about it already on other podcasts, but that is what we wanted first and foremost. But then we did see that you all were interested in working at our church.
Yeah, I don't know that it was something I was interested in at first. Not that I was closed off to it, but in high school, I they're all like, what are you going to do when you grow up? What are you going to do? And you're presented with like maybe the cookie cutter career paths. And it's like, you're going to college. Are you going to go into the medical field? Are you going into the business field? Are you going into the trade school field? It's just like these cookie cutter things. So that was what was in my brain. And I don't know, I don't know what the moment was when that switched for me, but at some point I realized that I was really passionate about the church. And I think I just started to explore the possibility of working there. And I went to college to learn about business, and it was really cool because I could apply stuff from the church to my projects that I was working on in school. And I was like, this is really cool. And I could also apply my school stuff to the stuff at church as far as like planning and executing events and projects. And I got really interested in that. And so I started to work on events at the church. I think I feel like I've done just about everything. But I started with projects and events, and then I've moved into even helping with events with our youth ministry and our kids ministry. And now I get to work in our First Impressions, which is a big team of volunteers. I get to help lead the team. I don't know, we've probably got like 8 teams under that team with greeting, parking, ushering, info, safety, medical teams. And that has been an honor to get to see that. It's definitely been a stretch for me. I'm more of a behind the scenes person, but I've gotten to see the amazing volunteers that make our church go every single weekend in their passion for the church, and to see others have the same passion that I have for our church is something so incredible.
And I hope that if there's any pastors' kids listening to this, which is why you did this podcast, they would think very seriously about being open to working at their parents' church. I also think it's great, give permission. Like if you don't want to do it, I understand that. As you guys started out this podcast, though, love your church, fall in love with the church. It is the bride of Christ. So if you're not working at your parents' church, find either attend there and plug in some way or another, or find if you're out of town, find another church and do the same. But it was a blessing to know that you were interested in actually working at the church, and I'll get into in a little bit why that is such a big deal and why so many pastors' kids and pastors should be considering that. Let me ask you this though, Sydney. I've got my opportunity to interview you, since this is a podcast coming from your perspective. What are unique challenges in thinking about working at a church where you grew up? I mean, this is all you've ever known, doing a church every weekend to set up, try to get it going, try to produce something that would honor God and our community. And so what has that challenge, though, been like to step on a staff, or even think about stepping on a staff where your dad is leading?
Good question. It's definitely a blessing, but there are challenges. And I would say for me, the biggest one is I always want to be showing that I'm working hard and I'm not taking this opportunity for granted. Like, yes, my dad's hiring me, but I don't want it to look like that I'm taking advantage of that opportunity in a way where I could just slack off and not have to work as hard. And I think that I have to first work hard just to do a job that others on our staff are also having to do, but then I have to work hard to earn the respect of our team and them knowing that I am working hard. And I think if I was slacking, that it would be more apparent than maybe if someone else was slacking. And I don't think anyone specifically has put that on me. My parents certainly have not, and no one on our staff has, but it's just something that I feel that I need to do to honor God and to show that. I don't know, Dad, do you think that is... what do you think about that expectation?
It's probably a real feeling for any kid that is on a staff as a pastor's kid, feeling like you got to work extra hard to show that you're competent or to earn respect. You don't want it to be that way. I, as the father, don't want it to be that way, but it does unfortunately happen that way. And I think there are real examples, and there's some kids that would listen to this where that was the issue, and And I think it puts a lot of pressure, and this is one of the reasons why the pastor's kid says, no, thank you. I don't want, to have to work double to prove myself. God's my identifier, and so I don't need, but it happens that way, and you almost get put in a religious type way of operating where, you're judged by these extra works in order to just be even with everybody else. So a little unfair, but again, I think there's ways to combat that, and I'm going to talk about what my staff has to know about me and my kids working on my team and what you all should pay attention to as well. But you guys, I think it is real. For you have to come in to work. Probably, they're watching. Is she late?
Yeah.
Is she taking advantage of days off? Like, you felt all that probably, or at least you think about that sometimes.
I do think about that. I'm like, I don't want to have that expectation, because I've seen it in other ways where you're working with your parents or people who've only ever had ministry jobs and grown up in ministry take advantage of some of the flexibleness of our jobs. Like we do have a flexible schedule during the week, though we are on 24/7. That's something that I appreciate, but I know in the past people have taken advantage of that, and I don't want to be one of those people, because I know what you guys have fought for to get to where you are now, and so I always want to uphold that standard.
Yeah, that appreciate it. And you've worked hard at that, but I do think it becomes a bit of a challenge, and you have people that are watching a little unfairly. I wanna say that another challenge you guys probably have is that this is the reality. I want to talk about it more, but you guys know the vision inside and out. People don't even get that. They don't understand how woven that DNA is into your children. They have lived it, breathed it. They know what's expected of a successful environment at our church, what is not. They know the vision, so deeply. And you know it, Sydney. And sometimes you probably see people that don't know the vision on the team. And how do you handle it when maybe somebody is doing something a little off vision and wondering if it's your role to say something?
That is something that I honestly still struggle with. And it's interesting. I don't know if you know this, but I was going to counseling at some point a few years back, and there was maybe some tension in our church, and I could feel it personally, even though I wasn't involved in it. And I know you feel that way, because you feel like, to you, like your church is like your child, like something you've birthed, something that you've raised and grown, and when the church is going through tension, you feel it. And I was explaining it to my counselor, and they said that it really is like a sibling to me. Like, this is like something that, like a sibling, like if your sibling's hurting, or if someone is picking on your sibling, like you feel that, and you feel that responsibility and ownership. And so for me, when someone is off vision or saying something off vision, I really struggle with it, because I know it in my heart, and I'm also very protective. But there's times where maybe I can be too overprotective, where I'm not open to another good idea someone has. And so trying to figure out when to speak up and when to not, because there's times where I'm in meetings and I'm not the one in charge, and I might have an opinion on something because I know the vision, and there's times where that's not really the right place to speak up, and I've had to learn that. But there are times where if there is someone saying something off vision, then it's on me to speak up and talk about it. But because I am also young, I have to recognize that I can learn a lot from people who have been in ministry longer than me, from people that are older than me. And so determining when to speak up and when to not speak up is something that has been a challenge for me.
You have the challenge because you say, well, I don't want to offend somebody who is maybe even above me. Yeah. But in a healthy staff culture, you want the vision carriers to have direct conversations with those who are maybe off vision. You want to empower, the culture of your team, so that every issue is not have to brought up to leadership to kind of talk through. Like, it's just like, oh, we got to address every single off vision issue. It's so exhausting for the leaders to have to do that. And so when you empower your staff to have those conversations where things are off vision, stuff can get nipped in the bud right away. And so that's a hard balance, though, because you feel like maybe in your case you're overstepping, and yet I would want any staff member to bring up to somebody else's attention, like, hey, what you're talking about is not our vision at our church. If there's a disagreement about the vision, then leadership can come in and say, oh, that, no, here's right here in this situation. But you like those things to be dealt with at the ground level, and yet here is a pastor's kid going like, I don't know, I don't want to step on anybody's toes. And again, that's part of the unique nature of the role. But my thinking is you still got to do it, and you still got to share when somebody is off vision. One thing is, Sydney, is you guys don't, I think what a lot of people don't understand is when a kid comes on staff who works, who is the family, pastor's kid, you all, if like you got a 4-year college degree,
Yeah.
and dealing with some business executive type work, you could get a job probably making double, maybe, what you make now.
And I have had opportunities to look at other jobs too.
That's right. And I don't think people understand that about, really, it's not just my daughter, it's a lot of people on our staff, all of our staff just about, I mean, really, are working for less than they could make in say, the marketplace, secular. And people need to understand that, I think, in general, but I'm preaching to the choir here just a little bit, but maybe somebody's listening to this that's, not in this sphere of pastors and kids. They are often doing high-level executive work for a lot less money. They're doing work that a lot of people could not handle in some ways, because it's so heavy, and then you add the spiritual component. So anyways, they are worthy of honor. Staff kids that are, from the pastor's kids, they're worthy of honor. But anyways, that's something I wanted to share there. Go.
Talking about like vision and stuff, I know you guys, even since we were younger, we've always had conversations about ministry and vision. And I remember my sister and I, like, even when we were in kids ministry, we would come home and we would talk to you guys about some of the stuff and ideas of things we could do better. I don't know if you remember any of that. And
Sure.
I think we caught on pretty quickly when there was maybe some tension in the ministry. Even though my parents, I think they did a good job of trying to separate that from us, we would always be able to just kind of know when something was going on, and sometimes we would even guess it correctly. Do you remember that?
Yes, I remember that, and you still can to this day, a lot of things, but we did, I think you talked about it in another podcast, we try to protect you a little bit of these things, but this is the thing, the vision so deeply, you can't really hardly pull one over. Like, you're coming to us at times, as parents going, hey, there's something happening in this area of the ministry, and it's whack, it ain't right, Mom and Dad. and sometimes we knew already, and we were just like, oh yeah, we're watching that, But sometimes, you guys bring things to us which were like, oh, what? That was happening. I thought that was always valuable. But we did have to have conversations at times, because church was our baby.
Yeah.
It was our sibling. It was whatever you want to call it. And so talk about, like, have you enjoyed being able to come home and talk about church with your parents? You draw a little bit of a line on that, or what's that like for a pastor's kid working on the staff?
I mean, honestly, I think we always really enjoyed it, getting to talk through things that we have seen, and I don't know, I think because we're so protective of the church, that's something that we liked, but there were times where it was like, okay, we're not going to talk about church, because that's like, my parents work together, they come home from work together, they're talking about work, and we all go to church together, we're always talking about church, and so there's definitely times where we have to not talk about that, and I don't know, when did you guys ever like decide to set boundaries with that, or?
Well, I have, I think in some of the stuff you referenced a few years ago, there was just, I think I was personally boiling inside over some things as I was wrestling with, sort of, God help me be calm about this, and yet I was personally struggling with some things going on in the ministry that the other employees were doing, and so I had to sometimes draw the line. Like, I'm already simmering about this, but yeah, it's not fair to my kids because they want to talk about it, because they're upset. But I'm like, I've had so much of it, I can't talk about it anymore. That's very difficult. And not everybody would do what I did necessarily. Maybe the entire family talks about it, but you can talk about something so much that's struggling in the ministry and take your eyes off the bride, the beauty of the bride, and you can end up just going down rabbit holes where, like, okay, 5 people just got saved at a thing last night, and we're over here talking about stupid stuff, compared to the kingdom's growth. So, that was always a challenge, but it's still tough because you're seeing the same things and it hurts you because it's your baby.
It's so cool, though, like, the stuff that we get to experience together in the life change, like, just reflecting on it. I know after big Christmas or Easter weekends, like, we'll come home and we'll have dinner. We're all so exhausted, but we're talking about the cool stories that we heard, even some funny moments, but, like, we all get to bond over that. And I don't know what other families get to do that, where you get to, your work it surpasses everything, and what you get to do is having eternal impact, and you're all getting to do it together on the same mission. And those are some of my favorite moments, when we're exhausted but we're so spiritually, like, rejuvenated, and we just get to share those moments together. It's really, really special.
Yeah, that is nice, and I think this is what I would say about a family at the end of the day that can work together in ministry. You have to be emotionally healthy. Like, if you are not able to process, with God's help, some of the things that you see, because it's spiritual. So what you want, whether it's your pastor's kid or your pastor, anybody on staff, honestly, what you want is everybody to live their life great for God. You want that. You want your staff to do great things. And then you see people breaking their homes, their families, their lives, making bad decisions, and it can wear on you. So if you're not emotionally and spiritually healthy, you end up really having a struggle, because you see all that happening at work, and then you bring it home and you can't process it, and it just chaos ensues. In fact, that leads me to this, Sydney. You and Brooke, you have to deal with your own spirituality, especially now you're adults. You have had to transition to that in your life. But what did you learn about staying strong in your faith, all right, while working at a church? Because working at a church doesn't mean you're growing. So how have you had to work through that? And maybe you might know of Brooke's situation as well, but go ahead.
Yeah. Well, once you realize you're choosing your faith for yourself and not just depending on your parents' faith or whatever, that has a huge influence, but you also have to feed yourself spiritually. And I read in a book one time, it's called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality by Peter Scazzaro. You've read that book, right, there? Yeah. It's a good book, and it said, it's something along the lines of, like, doing for God is not the equivalent of being with God. And so just because I am at a church, a holy place, 6 days a week, doing work, does not mean that I am spending intentional time with God. And that is something that can get misinterpreted. Like, you are at church, oh, you must be this spiritual, holy person who knows everything about God. And that's just not true. There are spiritual battles that I still have to fight. And if I am not feeding myself spiritually at home and spending time with God away from being around people, then the enemy's going to attack me. And the enemy loves to attack people who are in leadership and high positions, because if he can bring me down, he can bring others down who are looking up to me. So that is something that I have had to wrestle with.
I want to ask you a question about this, and it's a heavy question from this topic that we're talking about, but one of the great challenges for a kid to be on a staff with his dad is when you hear them attacking your parents. They're attacking your parents, and I don't know, you'd have to be kind of stupid to do that, because that's just an awful thing to do for about 15 different reasons. But it happens. What have you done when you've heard that kind of thing take place?
Let me tell you. I know a few things. Like, first of all, when people attack the church, they're attacking my parents, they're attacking me. They don't know, they're not doing that specifically because they want to come against us.
First, they're attacking the bride of Christ. 100%.
Yes. And I'm like, how could you say that? Even in high school, like, oh, you go to New Walk Church, blah, blah, blah. Like, oh, really? Do you know my dad's a pastor there? My sister's had some really good comebacks, but I don't. I tend to, like, have stuck back. But if she was on here, she could give you some good comebacks. But it's been really hard for me knowing that someone has said something about our church or left our church in a really nasty way towards my parents, to have to see them again or to have to see them walk back in the church. That is something really, really hard for me. Or if I hear conversations of people saying something that they don't agree with that we're doing, that is very hard for me. Like, I don't know how else to say it, but knowing why people have left staff as I've gotten older and the things that they've said about my parents, to me, it's really hard to forgive and to give grace for that.
Well, I think this is why a lot of kids don't want to work on a staff, is because they don't want to be in the middle of that crossfire. I mean, you think about it, we've had people that will talk bad about us, say things, and then a year or two later they're back. And they actually want you to love them, and we have to. We actually have to. This is what God is requiring of me as the shepherd, but they come back and they want you to love them as though they never said anything negative, they never were gone, and we have to. And, I have to do that. I think that's harder maybe for a pastor's kid. You maybe just want to do something a little more violent.
Yeah, probably. But I think, too, like, I've had to lose friendships over people not agreeing with the vision of our church and maybe coming against that and having to say, look, if you're coming against that, like, you're coming against the vision of my family. Like, this is very personal to me. And they've left the church, and again, you're losing a friendship. And seeing staff members come and go, that is something that is hard for me, because I'm like, well, it's kind of a struggle, but like, oh, I have a new person on our staff. Good, great. I'll get to know you for a few years. See you later. It's hard to develop deep friendships sometimes with people within the church. And I think that's why our family has grown even closer, though, because we know that in the end we're all here for each other. We've been through hard things and we've come through it together, and we've always stuck by each other's side, and that's something that I've always really, really valued. I think we've pulled each other in a lot closer through these hard times.
But this comes into being a part of the firm foundation of life, emotionally, spiritually, because, again, if you're a young person thinking about getting on your parents' staff and you are emotionally kind of messy right now, you are not having your spiritual house in order, the foundation of God in your life, these things will set you off into deep brokenness. And so we say, you have to be ready for it. I've had more practice because I've gone through it 1,000 times. It happens to me all the time. But my kids, it's a little different. And those kids listening, this is a little different. You have it happen a few times, and it can leave you scarred. You're just like, oh, I'm not getting near that, because your defenses go up. All of your defense mechanisms go up and say, I will never be around that again. And so the kid not only doesn't want to be on staff, they want to be at church. Okay, with all of that, there's highs and lows. I do want to share about why I want to encourage every pastor's kid to actually want to be on their staff, and why every pastor should want their kid to be on their staff. But let me ask you, highs, lows, cutting comments, big cool days as well, all the things you've seen over 18 years, what would you say to a pastor's kid who maybe has that opportunity to be on their parents' staff, dad's staff, but have been pushing away from it? What would you say?
Man, if I have to do it all again, I definitely would. There's something so special about getting to work alongside your dad in ministry. And I would just bring out these verses. 1 Corinthians 6:19 through 20. Don't you realize that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who lives in you and was given to you by God? You do not belong to yourself, for God bought you with a high price. So you must honor God with your body. And then the other one is James 4:14. How do you know what your life will be like tomorrow? Your life is like the morning fog. It's here a little while, then it's gone. And those two verses are a reminder to me that this life isn't our own, and we may have selfish desires, but God has put you in a very unique position where not only your dad has this vision, but God already has given you a vision and a plan for your life, and you have this vision of a church that is woven into your DNA that you can use to further the kingdom even more. And you can do it alongside of your family. And the body God has given you, this life God has given you, it's all going to pass away because this earth is not our home. And so to get to be a part of something even bigger than yourself, something that the world may not understand why you're doing or why you have a job like this. I get comments like, oh, you work at a church, like very confused. But it's like, I have to know in my heart that I'm doing something that is so much bigger than myself and is going to have eternal impact. And that, to me, that trumps everything else that I could ever want to do.
I love the scriptures you picked out there. We're talking about, God has given you this body as a vessel. God has given you time. You don't know how much time you have, but making the most of those moments too, I think, is important. And yes, okay, so this leads me to a chance for me to take over your podcast for just a moment.
Please.
So those of you who are listening, pastors, family, pastors, parents, pastors, kids, I had somebody sit me down one time. He was a pastor of a very large church, probably at the time 15,000 people, and he said, here's the thing I would tell you about your kids working on your staff. He said, you should be unashamed of wanting it. You should be, you should not abdicate the opportunity to have them be there. You should take not the mindset of worrying about what the congregation thinks or what people think. I want to be clear that a family church where the entire kids and wife and everybody owns all the leadership positions, that's unhealthy, I think, for a lot of reasons I don't have time to get into. But I mean, we have a large staff here, 25 to 30 employees, and in that, like we just, I've a couple of my family on here with me, so it's not like we've taken over, but to be unashamed to say, I want my child on my staff, and to challenge, to say, hey, this is okay. And the reason the pastor told me this is simply what we've already talked about. Nobody knows the vision more deeply, strongly, powerfully than the pastor, his wife, and the kids. If they've been around it deeply, they know it inside and out. And one of the greatest gifts a pastor could ever want is for everybody on his staff to know the vision deeply. We have some amazing people on our staff that I feel know the vision very, very well, and they're doing an amazing job with it. One thing I never have to worry about, though, is my daughter knowing the vision. It is inside and out. You can't put a price tag on that as an employee. By the way, if you had a small business, your husband, wife, small business here in town, and it was growing and doing an amazing thing, and your kids loved it, and they knew the vision of that company inside and out, you would want them, absolutely, 99 times out of 100, you'd want them to be on that team with you because they know the business inside and out. Church isn't necessarily business. We're better than business, but we would want, just like anybody else, for our kids to step into a position where you don't have to worry about the vision. Of course, you don't have to worry about them working hard, hopefully, because you taught them the value of work ethic. And that closes out a position in the church that you will not have to worry about that person knowing the vision. It is invaluable. If you're a pastor listening to this, you should not feel ashamed about wanting that. Not at all. That shame comes from our spiritual enemy. And then I would also say, as a staff kid, you should be very comfortable with that as well. It doesn't mean you won't have the obstacles and people talking trash. But it does still mean, this all means you are very well qualified potentially for that opportunity as long as you're in the right spiritual realm and following leadership principles of Timothy and Titus for your life. But at the end of the day, you are a valuable piece for that pastor, your father, your parents, and I want to put a stamp on that to be unashamed.
Okay. Good speech there. I really like that. I would give 2 pieces of practical advice to a pastor's kid who is in ministry, working with their parents, or just in ministry in general. Even if you're not working. Okay, 2 pieces of advice. Well, the first one, for anyone, go to counseling. I have found that it has been really helpful for me to talk through things with a third party rather than bring it to my parents' attention or just internalizing it all. Going to counseling has been helpful. Just talk through it with someone who doesn't go to our church, who doesn't know me, doesn't know any of the people involved. Even if they don't understand my lifestyle, just processing it has been very helpful. And the second thing, I would say, if you're a kid on staff, for me, I do not work directly under my father. I work under a few different layers. We have an executive pastor, and then under my executive pastor, we have the first impressions director, and then there's me. And so for me, I respect and follow that layout of who my direct report is, and I bring things to them and trust that God has also put that person there for a reason. I don't come home to my parents and say, oh, here's all the thing that's wrong and blah blah blah. I go through a healthy way of doing that. And I think, would you say if someone has their child on staff to not have their pastor or their father as their direct
I think
report?
It's always helpful, but again, I wouldn't put a limit on what that young person's capability is. If they are the best for any leadership role and it happens to report to me, I'm not gonna just do some sort of other hire if somebody is less qualified. So I'm not afraid of that. It does make things a little easier, for sure, but you always want the best employee, and you include in that vision, work ethic, all of that, but you always want the best employee. And that's why sometimes you guys aren't on our staff to take over the church, not at all. There's always that representation of that some people think about, but sometimes a pastor's kid does take over a church because they are the best qualified potentially maybe to lead that church. Sometimes they're not, and a mistake is made there, but I don't think you draw any line that's superficial, man-made, when God is in charge of what could be great in anybody's life.
Well said. Well, I hope that you guys have gotten some insight from us. We don't know everything, but I know that I'm so blessed to have a great relationship with my parents and that we've gotten to go through ministry together. And it has been one of the most beautiful things in the whole wide world. So with that, let's go ahead and close out in prayer. Lord, I am just so grateful for the opportunity that we get as pastors' kids, as kids in ministry, as pastors who might be listening to this, to get to further your kingdom, the honor that it is to get to do work for you, Lord, through the local church. And I'm praying for anyone listening to this who maybe is struggling in ministry, struggling with maybe their calling and maybe wanting to step into ministry but worried about the expectations of others. I pray that they would hear this and know, God, that this life is not their own, and that you have a unique purpose for them, and that they can embrace that calling, they can embrace that vision that you've given them. And I just thank you for that, and I pray over each of them in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thanks for having me, Sydney.
Maybe this podcast sparked some questions for you from being in ministry, working in ministry, maybe from a pastor's perspective, a pastor's kid perspective. We want to know those questions. In the show notes, there is a link to ask us questions. Thank you for those of you who are following, liking, subscribing, sharing our podcast. I would encourage you to keep doing that, or do it if you haven't already, because what it does is it pushes this podcast out to the right audience. Share it with a pastor's kid that you know that maybe needs to hear this. Don't forget, we have new episodes every other Monday that will be posted. So thanks for joining us in the Fishbowl.